Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christelle. I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us for Update 3 on Australia's landside challenges. We will be covering recent developments on the industrial action in the ports, weather disruptions, container congestion, and recent cyber attacks. But before we get into them, we have a few housekeeping items to go through. Firstly, please input all your questions on the chat box below. We will go through them during the Q&A later on. Secondly, take a few moments to complete the feedback survey after the webinar, please. Thirdly, a recording of this webinar will be distributed via broadcast to you by the end of this week. And lastly, if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Now, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest speakers for today. First, we have Scott Walker, our National Transport Manager for Commercial. Scott has been in the wharf cottage industry for over 25 years. I'm also very pleased to introduce our second guest speaker. We have Mark Hume, General Manager of Operations in DP World Australia. Mark has over 30 years experience in the Australian container terminal industry. Both Scott and Mark are members of the Port Transport Logistics Task Force and Empty Container Working Group. We are so thrilled to have Mark today because he's going to be providing an insight into the perspective of stevedores. I'm now happy to pass you on to Scott, who will now provide an update on the current landside issues. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Christelle. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Thanks and welcome also to Mark from DP World. It will be great to get an update directly from you. I believe you have some good news to share with regards to your EA negotiations. The situation remains very fluid at the moment. Today, I want to touch on the various current issues at hand: industrial action, terminal congestion and delays, weather issues, empty crisis, and of course, some cyber attacks recently. As a general update, and following on from our recent webinar on Europe, the following remains. Various shipping lines, COSCO, Maersk, OOCL and Hamburg Sud are not accepting bookings from Europe to Australia. This is in effect till week 46-47 or through November. This is going to put significant pressure on the current direct service from MSC and CMA and of course Hapag-Lloyd transshipments. Ex-China demand remains strong. Carriers are still reporting full vessels and large backlog of containers at origin port. There are also significant delays through the transshipment ports of Singapore and Port Keelang, with large amounts of China and European cargo adding to the already high cargo volumes from Asia. Rates have skyrocketed in recent weeks due to a lack of equipment, lack of space, and huge demand. We see this continuing through November. We are expecting a little bit of improvement from origin ports, both Europe and Asia, from early December. This is mainly due to importers' consideration of cargo arrival during Christmas closures. We are, of course, very experienced freight forwarders and are working around the clock to find solutions. We will find solutions for your cargo. We just need a little bit of patience and understanding from your side. If you want to help us to help you, give us as much pre-advice as possible of your orders, bookings, and general requirements. Okay, on to some of the current local issues. Industrial action. With regards to industrial action, Patrick's and the MUA have increased their stay of execution till December 1. In this time, they are expecting intense negotiations. We hope they find a resolution over the next few weeks. Hutchison have also advised they have reached an agreement with the MUA to ensure no industrial action occurs till the end of January 21. This is good news. Mark, can you please give us an update on the situation at DP World, both Sydney and nationally where possible? Could you also give us your understanding of the potential implications with regards to industrial action with Switzer and the Tugs services?
Sure, Scott. So from a DP World perspective, we've been negotiating since August 2000 and it was actually 18, not 19. Pleased to announce that we have reached an agreement in Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne in our respective 3 terminals on the East Coast. Fremantle, unfortunately, is a little further off. From a Sydney perspective, we expect a vote or an endorsement vote by the workforce on the 18th of November. And that provides, I guess, ourselves and the industry some clear air, at least particularly through Sydney, for the next 3.5 years. The other sites in terms of Brisbane and Melbourne will vote soon after that, probably the following week. In regards to Switzer, so they've provided notification of, again, industrial action from the Maritime Union as the members of their Tugs. So they include overtime bans, restrictions on recalling employees back from periods of leave, use of their operating system, their maintenance operating system. We're still waiting, I guess, for some more details, but it looks like their delays will be restricted to probably twice daily, which will be at the change of shifts, both at around midnight and at midday, where there'll be a delay in terms of tug crew availability. One of the fortunate things, the three stevedores, the Port Authority of New South Wales and NSW Ports have all met and had some discussions with Switzer, and collectively the three stevedores will work together to try and minimise delays on vessels. So where we were arriving or departing a vessel and not planning to put labour on it for a short period of time, we will swap that booking with one from Patrick or with Hutchison, where they had planned to work that vessel. So to try and minimise the downtime and maximise the use of labour that's already engaged to work vessels.
Thanks, Mark. It sounds like a collaborative approach should work out okay for all. Terminal congestion and delays. The current situation with terminal delays is as follows. Patrick is currently around 14 days behind in Sydney, meaning in the last few weeks they've caught up a week. My understanding is that they have caught up in Brisbane and Perth completely, with Melbourne remaining around 5 days behind. Hutchison in Sydney remains 2 to 3 days behind. This is mainly from the recent weather issues in Sydney. I've been advised that Hutchison have increased their labour force with 30 new casuals onboarding this week. Certainly good news. We are still experiencing delays during pickup of containers. This varies between the ports and the time of day and week. Mark, can you give us an update on DP at the moment?
Thanks, Scott. So very similar to Hutchison. So our delays are currently down to about 2 or 3 days. We had the odd vessel that was significantly impacted from delays in early October. That are probably the exception of that. But in the most part, we're down to 2 or 3 days. We would expect in the next 10 to 14 days to be back on top for the majority of vessels and servicing them as per their normal schedule windows through Sydney.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, weather issues. Weather often affects port operations. However, for the most part, it is the ship's ability to safely leave or arrive at the port. The weather in Sydney last week certainly caused its problems. Ships were unable to arrive or leave, and also vessel operations had to be halted for a period. This means that the stevedores were unable to load vessels. I note during this time of poor weather, the road operations continued, meaning we were still able to access containers on the ground. The overall impact to vessel operations and arrivals was around 2 days lost. Mark, can you please give us an update from DP on the weather issues and also how long it takes to recover from these sorts of events?
Scott, it depends on which weather conditions we're talking about. So if I separate wind versus swell, so from a swell perspective, it is dangerous for pilots to board or disembark vessels where the swells exceed about 2.5 metres outside. So from the pilot's perspective, they won't arrive or depart a vessel when the swells are significant or above 2 metres. Wind tends to be the bigger challenge that we've faced over the last, I guess, 4 weeks or 6 weeks in particular. But this year, the weather delays would be greater than 10 times what they've been in previous years. Where the challenge comes with wind, given the upsizing of vessels onto the Australian service from most of the shipping lines, storm lines historically, so a storm line is additional wire rope that's run from the bow and the stern of the vessel across the wharf and across our crane rails that effectively ties the vessel to the berth more so than just using the bow and stern mooring lines. The larger the vessel, the greater the wind area, and particularly when something like a southerly comes through for DP World, it pushes the vessel off the berth, which makes it unsafe for us to have a key crane or ship-to-shore crane spread down the hold of the vessel or having the gangway secured to the wharf. So it varies depending on the size of the vessel, at what point the harbour master determines that storm lines need to be implemented. Normally, it has been, or historically, it's been about 35 knots has been the determining factor for vessels sort of between 2,500 TEU up to about 4,500 TEU. But given the size of the vessels now, where we have 6,000, 8,000, 9,500 TEU vessels, we're finding that winds beyond about 22 knots can often dictate the requirement for the harbour master to put the or direct storm lines to be installed. The impact, we've got to see a consistent reduction in the wind speed for those storm lines to be removed. Clearly, the harbour master takes the view that safety for the port is paramount, and given some historical challenges that have happened through botany. So those, we engaged yesterday with NSW Ports and the harbour master to look at how we might review those procedures, try and improve on them and minimise the amount of time that storm lines have been required. I guess some of the initiatives that we're looking to introduce is localised wind meters. You touched on before that our yard operations normally continue. That tends to be the RTG yard rather than the empty area that stops at a much lower wind speed. So the installation of localised wind meters, we're reviewing our stacking arrangements and looking at increasing our stack height by butting containers up. The benefits of those three initiatives should see that we can not only operate our empty areas in much higher wind speeds than we do today, but also it will provide us with additional space for empties at a time where clearly the empty container parks are quite challenged and transport companies in terms of dehiring.
Thanks, Mark. Certainly some challenges there, and that certainly leads me into our empty container crisis. Empty containers remain a challenge, with data now pointing to an imbalance of 50,000 containers. All stevedores have advised larger than normal exchanges for current vessels. This is up by around 1,000 moves per ship. This includes increased imports and more empty moves onto ships. Unfortunately, however, there are still more containers arriving in Sydney than leaving. 3 weeks ago, as an example, more than 4,000 TEU arrived into Sydney versus being sent out via full or empty exports. Last week, the imbalance was 800 TEU. This is still not enough and crippling the industry. We at Visa currently have over 300 containers in our yard we cannot dehire. There is an expected sweeper in the coming weeks to remove 4,000 TEU. Unfortunately, this is far from enough. Mark, you're doing a lot in the empty space at DP World. Can you give us an update?
Sure. I touched on obviously us looking at how we can increase our empty capacity to try and take some pressure off outside the terminal gates. Our statistics are not dissimilar to what you've indicated, Scott. In the last probably 6 weeks or so, imports are definitely outstripping exports, and sort of 53-47 from a percentage perspective. What we have seen probably the last 2 weeks in particular is, as we're coming back on schedule working our vessels, two things. We're allowing shipping lines now to load above their nominal or our contracted exchange volumes, and majority of that work is now swinging towards a higher or an increase in empty liftings. And in some instances, it's been significant. We've seen a new service introduced in the last 6 weeks from Asia down to Australia, calling it the DP World terminals. And for every import that they're discharging, they're loading back out about 1.5 to 2 exports, and majority of those are empty containers. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel. I think this is a challenge we're going to have for a number of months, but the focus from our perspective is getting our current windowed customers back on their schedules. I guess option 2 is providing the opportunity for them to load above their window exchange without impacting other services. And then number 3 would be for us accepting those empty loaders or sweeper vessels that have a great opportunity to move a large volume of containers in a very quick period of time.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it's certainly been good, the efforts from DP, which have been extended recently with the empty crisis. Okay, cyber attacks. Container chain was recently hit by a cyber attack. This is on top of the CMA CGM incident recently. For those of you unaware, container chain is the software which connects transport operators to all the empty parks and allows us to book containers in for dehire. We were unable to book empties for almost half a day, and the system was problematic, causing issues and delays for a further few days. This could have been catastrophic and luckily was recovered quickly. We were also lucky the attack happened on a Friday evening, meaning most of the weekend was spent recovering and reducing the impact to the industry. Okay, onto the options. Most of the options remain the same with the options in other states. So there is the option of road transport overnight from an alternate discharge state, certainly the quickest option, and we can react very quickly. Rail from alternate port of discharge. This takes a few extra days, of course, and will also depend on available rail bookings. We also have warehousing in all states, so we can unpack and redeliver from a visa warehouse. All these options can be offered for quickest possible turnaround. We're in a much better position to act due to early advice from shipping lines re-emissions from Sydney. It is also very important to be monitoring and staying on top of import-export availability times. These are changing regularly, so important to be working with the visa team to stay on top of these. By way of a reminder, please make sure you are communicating with your visa representatives who can tailor best solutions for your business. That's all from me today. We will now move on to some of the questions we have received.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you, Mark. We will first cover the questions that we received during the registration stage, and go through the ones that you guys were part of put it during the Q&A box below. This is a great opportunity for you to ask any questions of Mark about the operations at the port, delays or disruptions. Our first question is from Alexander. Is there any federal government response to clearing our empty container parks at the moment?
Look, nothing. There's currently it's currently a state issue. There is the empty park working group that we have in place. Both Mark and I are representatives of that working group. So currently it is a state issue. They are trying to push for more available land and also potential of nudging more sweeper vessels. I think that's the critical part at the moment. You know, it is important to remember we're in a peak season. There's a lot more volume even arriving than a normal peak season, and we've got a lot of other things that have happened as well. There is a lot of empties going out. Unfortunately, the imbalance remains the same, so we need to change that imbalance, and that's critical at the moment.
Thanks, Scotty. Adam has a related question to Alexander's one about the container parks in Sydney. He's asking if there's been any movement on using the Sydney airport to actually store empty containers.
I can probably answer that one. So there's been some correspondence this morning I've seen from Marika as the CEO of NSW Ports. An approach was made by NSW Ports to the airport. It is unlikely that the airport is in a position to assist at this time. So I think the simple answer to that question is no. Sydney Airport won't be an option. The positive news, however, has been that there has been approval for the empty parks and laden parks in the Botany precinct to increase their stacking height. So some parks historically have been limited to 4 high or 5 high, and approvals now being granted for those to go from 4 to 5 or from 5 to 6. Each individual operator will have to make conduct their own risk assessments and look at their operating procedures. The other challenge will be, given the parks are as full as they are today, it's not as easy to just change from a 4 high to a 5 high. You've really got to clear a stack out first before you can then relay the boxes down to being 5 high. But there are some initiatives that are being implemented across Botany that will help in the longer term.
Great, thank you, Mark. Our next question is from Eric. He's asking, how has the issues in Australia impacted services to New Zealand? And adding to that, we just received a question live from Janine, and she's asking, can you please update the situation regarding export to New Zealand? Is this also impacted?
Yeah, look, we've had some big impacts with exports to New Zealand to the level that we've actually, from Sydney, we've been roading and railing containers from Sydney to Brisbane or Melbourne to meet vessels to go to New Zealand. That was a couple of weeks ago, and we haven't done that for the last fortnight, which I think is good news. It means we're obviously getting more onto the ships. There's also some pretty big problems in Auckland as well. So there are large delays there at Tauranga and Auckland Port. I believe there's even, and it may even be hot off the press as well, that there's some potential congestion surcharges that are imminent in that space as well. So I think there's still more to come from a New Zealand perspective. Mark, have you got anything to add?
From a DP World perspective, we have two separate services that operate between New Zealand and our Sydney terminal. Our priority is to get every one of our customers' vessels back on schedule. So we're almost working vessels in order of arrival in the most part. So I think those delays will continue at least through DP World for the next 10 to sort of 14 days with that current 2-day or 3-day delay for us. But we're hopeful that, again, within 10 to 14 days, we should be back on top from our perspective.
Thanks, Mark. Our last question from the registration phase is from Peter. He's asking for an update about Singapore. What is the congestion situation there like at the moment?
Yeah, well, the situation in Singapore is not expected to improve markedly until the end of November, at least. The Singapore congestion is the actual reason why shipping lines are not currently accepting the bookings from Europe to Australia, as they know containers will get stuck in Singapore. So we are not expecting any sort of major change in November for that, but hopefully from there things start to normalise, and I'd say then Chinese New Year is the next chance to really catch up.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Scotty. That's all the questions we've received for the registration phase. Oh, okay, we've just gotten a question live from Helen. She's asking, what's the situation of Thailand container issues? They've also heard that Thailand is running out of containers. I'm not sure if you've got that information on hand, Scotty, but I mean, we can give that information to Helen offline.
Yeah, look, there are equipment issues, both my understanding from even our last webinar, there's equipment issues in Europe. There's also equipment issues throughout Asia. That's more generalized. So yeah, I think it's probably best we revert back to Helen with more information. But yeah, the equipment is a real problem. And if you just look at the volume that we now have in Sydney, that's not being evacuated back north, and that's only one particular issue, Sydney. So there's a lot of containers all over Australia that need to go back north, and even we were talking within the working group last week that the unknown is how many containers, like if these are sitting on 300 in our yard, how many other transport companies, of the top 20 transport companies in Sydney, how many is everyone sitting on? So there's so many stats we don't know. But yeah, the equipment issue through China and Southeast Asia is real.
Thanks, Scotty. And thank you so much, Helen, for that question. We'll be in touch with you with a little bit more information about the situation there in Thailand. Was there any other questions at all that we can answer live for you? If you can just input it on the Q&A box now, we'll get to them.
Crystal, I've just received one from a Jay Sharon.
Okay.
And the question is, despite DP World having negotiated with the MUA, is there a concerted effort between DP and the other stevedores to lobby government to more effectively expedite solutions for empty issues and congestion? And what are DP World actively doing to help the problem? So I might answer the question in reverse for a minute. So the change to our stacking configuration and the change to increasing our capacity is the first focus. When I say the first, it's one of our key focuses. Adding 500 or 1,000 TEU, if we could get to that point of additional storage in the port, will be a significant benefit to the transport industry in terms of dehiring empties that they currently can't offload at the empty parks where they're full or congested. It'd be nice to be able to wash our hands and say that we haven't got to deal with the MUA or these issues for the next 3 years or 3.5 years. Scott and I both sit on the empty container working group. We're both actively pushing Transport for New South Wales, the Transport Minister and the Port Authority to assist in this process, and working with, I guess, other industry participants to have a look at some of the solutions for the empty management program. I think the key issue from a DP World perspective to assist the industry is we can get these existing vessels back on window. It will provide holes in our normal schedule where we can take empty loaders or provide additional opportunities for shipping lines to load empties above their normal contracted exchanges. The shipping lines definitely want the empties out of Sydney. They have issues in China they've got issues in the States, and Scott touched on it in Europe and other locations. So they don't want the empty containers sitting here. It's costing them money. They have vessels sailing that probably lighter than they would like them to sail, given the imbalance. And we still see 60% of our exports being empty. I think the other benefit for industry potentially going forward is we should see some more empties start to actually transition into export containers with the change and the benefits, obviously, of the drought ending, with cotton, grain, and rural exports starting to pick up. That will provide some further opportunities. So from a deep well perspective, yeah, we're definitely not sitting on our laurels or just waiting and saying it's someone else's problem.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. I've actually got another question for you from Janine. There was a mention early in the presentation about potential industrial action for other port-related areas, e.g. the Tugs. She just wants a little bit more explanation on that. What does that mean exactly?
Sure. So I'm not an expert on Switzer or their industrial issues, but I'll try. Off the top of my head, there are a tug crew is 3 people. One is from the AMOU, one is from the Maritime Union, and normally one of them is from the Engineering Union. So it's the Maritime Union side who have advised that they're going to take industrial action. The limitations that they're placing on Switzer, in the most part, are administrative, but the ones that are operational is delays on the changeover of the tug crew or refusal to have their rest breaks on board the tug. So they will physically leave the tug, go to a smoko room. That has a natural flow-on effect where we understand from Switzer that there may be a 30-minute or a 60-minute, I don't know their rest break arrangements well enough, changeover at the end of each shift or during the middle of the shift. So will it present some challenges arriving and departing vessels? I guess simply yes. But I think with the cooperation amongst the 3 stevedores, NSW Ports and the Harbour Master, we can at least minimise that to ensure that, as we do today, we're prioritising vessels on arrival. So we may well have 2 ships alongside, one of which is not working for the first shift. Then what we would do is prioritise, in inverted commas, a Patrick vessel to sail and then arrive a Patrick vessel prior to us forcing, I guess, our normal process, which would be to have 2 ships alongside at any one time. So that should help minimise the impact of the Switzer industrial action that they're facing.
Thank you, Mark. You're very popular today. I have another question for you from an anonymous attendee. They're asking, Mark, in your exchanges with the lines, in regards to these new and positive developments, are there any suggestions that they're going to increase the space capacity back into Sydney again?
I'm not sure if the question is southbound or whether it's northbound. I assume it's southbound. I don't have any visibility on what the shipping lines intend to do from a southbound perspective. We are seeing the addition of some additional callers coming in to Sydney. As Scott indicated before, I think some of those, though, tend to be overflow, or they're picking up cargo that's been sitting in Singapore or in some other locations where there has been congestion. And unfortunately, that's probably accentuated some of the challenges of having more imports than exports. As we've tried to get vessels back onto their windows, we have limited the shipping lines to their exchanges through Sydney. So, where the contracted exchange, as an example, was 2,000 moves, if they were discharging 1,100, we were only allowing them to load 900 containers. Clearly, they will prioritise their laden exports ahead of empties historically, and that's to protect, I guess, their export customers. As we're starting to get back on top of things, we're allowing them to load, instead of the exchange 2,000 containers, 2,400 or 2,600. And what we're finding is the balance of those additional containers are all empties. So as we start to recover or get closer to a full recovery, you'll actually see the shipping lines moving far more boxes out from an export perspective on the basis that the empties are a lighter cargo and they can load more of those, whereas southbound tends to be slightly heavier.
Thank you, Mark. Question for you, Scott. Julie is wondering, are we expecting further price increases on empty dehires? I don't know if you have an answer for that.
Look, at this stage, no. However, we don't know what's around the corner. If there's a real possibility that if we don't get the right evacuation of empties at our yard, we'll clog up with too many empties. At the moment, we're managing it. So at this stage, no.
Great, thanks, Scott. And we have a last question from another anonymous attendee. They're looking to get more information in regards to charges for freight out of China. When will that return to normal? So I don't know if it's something that you can respond to, Scotty,
Look,
or we.
I'll give it a go. It's really unknown. We're not the shipping line. Very hard one for us to answer. We need to look at the very start of this too, when the shipping lines were just going to start hitting us with a surcharge from ETA. Through a lot of lobbying from our senior executives, we got that pushed back to ETD. So I guess also in the shipping lines' minds, they've missed a long chunk. That was a comment that we had in one of the working groups recently. There is still a lot of congestion. There's a lot to play out before this occurs. So look, I don't have that exact answer. It is the shipping lines dictating this and when they look to take away the congestion surcharges. So I'm sorry, I can't be more exact, but it is with them at the moment.
This is a great leeway because we are actually looking to put together a webinar with an update on China and Southeast Asia to Australia trade lane. So that's going to be happening in a few weeks. So stay tuned for more information. Hopefully that's going to give you a little bit more enlightenment and information in regards to that specific trade lane. So I think that's all the question we have at the moment. Is there? Oh, okay, we have another one. Are stack runs at the wharf a normal practice, or if it's due to port congestions?
It's 100% normal. Mark, you're on mute too, by the way. Oh, you're off now. But yeah, look, they're 100% normal. We operate stack runs all year round. Whether it's we don't deal in the empty stack runs like some of the other empty parks or empty carriers. But from a full container perspective, we're operating stack runs around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 364 days a year because we stop on Christmas Day. That is it. Mark, anything to add on that one?
No, Visa is one of the larger carriers that frequent our facility. Scott's right. They're working 24/7. Stack runs are a normal part of their business for laden containers. For empty containers, absolutely, they've been a part of the Australian waterfront since almost day one. So there are a number of dedicated empty carriers that do stack runs. So no, they're a regular part of every day.
Great, thank you, Mark. Last opportunity to input your questions live so we can get them responded to. Otherwise, we will finish up for today. Was there any other questions at all?
Christelle, just from a DPWell perspective, happy if your customers want to send any questions through after this, through you guys, we're more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mark.
Directly.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for your support on this, Mark.
Yeah,
Pleasure.
thank you. So, well, if that's the case, we probably just will wrap up for today. Thank you again for joining us. And if you, we will be sending out more information in regards to the China and Southeast Asia to Australia trade lane very shortly. So stay tuned. Have a great afternoon, and thank you once again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.